Welcome to the Story of Money by Ash Stewart. Episode 022, The Mafia of Mercantilism, on the classic case of a win-lose mindset. Back in episode 020, I said that the system that existed in Adam Smith's time, which he worked to overthrow, was a lot worse than what he ushered in, without in as much naming that older system. In the High Middle Ages, there existed a system called feudalism, centered around serfs living a miserable life, bound to their lords, and the system of guilds, which were essentially rackets. These I have explored in some detail in Tech C39 and Tech C43 in my series on innovation and progress. However, with an increase in economic activity in Europe that marked the end of the Middle Ages and ushered in the Renaissance, early modern ages, there arose a new system, driven by the increased competition between rival polities and emerging nation-states. This is what we call mercantilism. Madness in the methods. The idea was simple, or one might say simplistic. In any exchange, one party wins and the other party loses. That it was always a zero-sum game. The economic pie was fixed and wouldn't grow. Furthermore, the idea of wealth was solely the amount of gold and silver stockpiled in the country. That's it. The consequence of this was, given bullion was the means of international trade, countries gripped by mercantilism sought to minimize imports and maximize exports. After all, if you bought goods from abroad, it might be a drain on your gold/silver reserves, and vice versa. In summary, trade was seen as a war, not as a dance. This led to a raft of restrictive measures promulgated and enforced by the state, notably trade restrictions on imports, including the imposition of tariffs, which is simply an onerous tax levied on the goods, making the inflow of goods prohibitive by raising the costs to the consumers in the importing country. You scratch my back, I stab yours. But here's the thing, as I hope we've seen in the course of the last 21 episodes, with the concepts of episode 004, value creation in particular, in a normal emergent scenario, trade happens when both parties see a benefit to it. You might not necessarily like the price of something, but you might buy it anyway because that's a better course than not having the said item. Sometimes it's the best course available, given the vagaries of scarcity of goods and resources. So why didn't that apply, as was asserted by the proponents of mercantilism, to nation-states across international borders? Again, we have seen the answer to this. It's in fact what we started this series with. Money itself has no intrinsic value. It's simply a measure of value. And given gold and silver have been used to measure value, since they have acted as money, this value proposition applies to bullion too. It's akin to hoarding measuring tapes instead of using it to carry out productive tailoring. And the pursuit of maximizing exports and minimizing imports had ruinous consequences. Mighty cannons and silver bullets. If, as it became the done thing in Europe in the early 1500s, you want to export lots to hoard up gold and silver, what do? You go overseas and aggressively seek buyers abroad. And given this mindset, the aim is not mutually beneficial trading partners, but captive markets, that captivity being enforced by the force of the cannonball. The poster boy in this enterprise was the Kingdom of Spain, freshly united, and having expelled its Muslim population after 8 centuries of their presence in the Iberian Peninsula. There are other factors at play, such as being fired by a fervor never to be invaded, and the missionary zeal is part of that fervor, to spread their Catholic religion far and wide. But let's stick to the economic angle, important as these other factors are to the wider history. So when the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Americas that they had only recently discovered, pretty much all they did was ask the locals if they had any gold or silver, simply looking past the vast quantities of actual natural resources the new continents had aplenty. Imagine being invited to the most incredible banquet ever, every dish imaginable, and you go, "Do you have any ketchup?" Eventually, they did find massive amounts of silver, literally a mountain of silver. This makes for a juicy story in its own right, so I'll come back to it another time. And the focus of Spanish crown was in simply extracting the silver. As a consequence of the flood of silver into Europe, obviously, its value fell, i.e. inflation, with the authorities having no clue as to why, and in fact, with the lives of ordinary Spaniards getting far worse in this project of royal debasement of money. Bruges, Antwerp, Amsterdam, and then London being early pioneers of financial innovation and progress, the Dutch and the English mindsets started off slightly less mercantilist as compared to their southern rivals, and thus more economically sound, relatively speaking. Until one man from Glasgow fought to change it all. Adam Smith struck a dagger at the very heart of the system of mercantilism. As we saw in the earlier episodes mentioning him, he was fiercely against the monopolistic practices of the merchant class that had had the state in their grip. Smith specifically insisted that the idea of mercantilism was, in fact, a stitch-up by the monopolistic merchant class to entrench their own incumbent advantage and power by eliminating competition, with the regulatory might of the state in cahoots. In the place of mercantilism, as I've written at length previously, Adam Smith sought to describe and usher in a system that was concerned with many more economically sound concepts, such as the mutual benefit of trade and myriad others we've explored. Luckily, in our own current enlightened times, as nation-states, we don't take a beggar-thy-neighbor attitude to international trade, erecting barriers such as tariffs, right?